The tower was not just made of bricks, she was made of ambition, fear, and an ancient desire for eternity. In the middle of the plains of Shinar, a united people decided to build a building that would reach the heavens. But that wasn't just architecture, it was a statement. They weren't just building a building, they were putting out a message. We will not be scattered, we will be like gods. In the Genesis narrative, it is at this point that one of God's most curious and abrupt interventions appears. No plagues, no angels, no fire from heaven. Just one quick decision, confusing the language. And then everything stops. The monumental work is abandoned, the workers disperse, and the dream of ascension is buried in the sands of time. But the question that echoes to this day is, why? What was so threatening about that tower that led the Creator to directly interfere? The biblical text tells us that nothing they intend to do will be prevented from them. But what exactly were they trying? Was it just an engineering work? Or was there a deeper project of power, centralization, and replacement of the divine? If topics such as ancient history, biblical culture, and great enigmas of humanity interest you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every detail has context, every story has depth, and no story is told halfway. The Tower of Babel was not born in a vacuum. The location, identified as Shinar, refers to the region of ancient Babylon in the current territory of Iraq. This civilization was one of the first to master the art of urbanization, cuneiform writing, and monumental engineering. Ziggurats, tiered structures that imitated sacred mountains, were common in this region. The most famous of them, Etemenanki, which means the foundation of heaven and earth, was built in Babylon, and many scholars associate it directly with the account of Babel. These towers were no ordinary buildings. They were religious structures, centers of worship, and at the same time, symbols of imperial power. They represented the connection between gods and men, a cosmic bridge where the top touched the sky and the base established authority on earth. By building a ziggurat on a global scale, the inhabitants of Shinar were not just trying to reach God, they were trying to establish control over the divine. Control language, control space, control the sky. There is a subtle detail in the text. They say, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves so that we will not be scattered." The concern with the name is revealing. In ancient culture, name was not just identity, it was power, memory, and dominance. In wanting to make a name for themselves, they were not just seeking recognition, they wanted narrative autonomy. They wanted to define their own history without depending on the Creator. In the background of this desire is the figure of a mysterious man, Nimrod. He appears in Genesis as a powerful hunter before the Lord, founder of cities such as Babel, Erech, and Nineveh. Its name in Hebrew carries the root of rebellion or revolt. More than a political leader, he is presented as a symbol of aggressive centralization. The tower may have been his idea, a monument to human power, to absolute control, to forced unification. But God sees something beyond the visible. He sees the heart behind the engineering, and decides that it needs to stop. Not with war, but with confusion. A confusion that breaks the single language, but preserves diversity. That interrupts the tower, but preserves humanity. And so Babel falls, not through structural collapse, but through the implosion of meaning. The silence that followed the tower's collapse was deeper than the sound of falling bricks. It was the silence of incomprehension. A community that once spoke with one voice was now fragmented into dozens of disconnected sounds. Construction was interrupted, but the rupture was not physical. It was cultural, mental, existential. God did not destroy the tower with lightning. He destroyed the tower by disconnecting his thoughts. This unique language was not just a means of communication. It was a complete system of ideas, values, and command. Linguistic uniformity functioned as an ideological gear. Whoever controlled the words, controlled the thought, and whoever centralized thought, centralized power. The Tower of Babel represented a radical convergence of human purpose. Without breaks, without counterpoint, without diversity. It was a unification machine that threatened to transform humanity into a single, predictable, manipulable entity. This is not an isolated theory. Experts in Hebrew literature note that the Babel narrative is structured in direct opposition to God's plan presented in the previous chapters. Instead of filling and multiplying the earth, the people want to settle. Instead of depending on the name that God gives, they want to make a name of their own. Instead of living in diversity, they try to forge an artificial uniformity. Everything indicates that it was not technical progress that was at stake, but the displacement of the center of authority. The top of the tower did not point to the heavens. It pointed to the ego. Collective, centralized, organized ego. The mighty story of the tower is a critique of the idolatry of forced unity, the illusion that a unified system around absolute power will bring security and permanence. The same illusion that sustained ancient empires like the Egypt of the pharaohs or the empire of Nebuchadnezzar. They all used architecture, language, and symbols to centralize control and reinforce authority. In each of them, the tower reappears, in another form. What happened in Babel echoes in the great human projects of domination. It doesn't matter if the material is brick, stone, or algorithm, the pattern is the same. Create a total system where everything works perfectly as long as it is obeyed without question. The Tower of Babel was the first global political manifesto. It was not a question of ascending to the heavens, but of establishing a human throne in the highest place of existence. The curious thing is that even when intervening, God did not use punishment. He did not destroy the builders. He didn't curse them. It merely reintroduced what had already been given in Eden: multiplicity, diversity, decentralization. Instead of a single language, several. Instead of a single center, many people. Instead of a unifying tower, a plural world that defies the imposition of a single model. The confusion was a release, dispersion, an act of mercy. The unification project was stopped not because God fears progress, but because he protects free will. The tower did not fall due to structural failure, but because no construction born of human pride can sustain itself in the face of the truth. The world followed its fragmented course, but the desire for a tower never disappeared. He just changed shape. In each civilization that arose, the temptation to unify everything under the same language, the same system, and the same truth reappeared with new tools. And now, millennia later, that impulse returns with quiet, sophisticated force. The Tower of Babel has not been forgotten. It has been digitized. We live in an era where language is once again unique, not by military imposition, but by algorithms that shape what we see, think, and feel. Social networks, search engines, video platforms, and voice assistants operate on a centralized logic as efficient as the old tower. Everything is being translated into a common language: data. Plurality still exists, but it is apparent. Behind the screens, a dwindling number of systems organize the flow of global discourse. Artificial intelligence, for example, appears as the new universal language. Capable of interpreting, translating, and generating content in all languages, it brings people together, and at the same time can level thinking. The danger is not in the technology itself, but in the spirit that guides it. When the objective is efficiency, productivity, and market domination, the human element tends to be sacrificed. Discourse becomes shaped not by the search for truth, but by algorithmic performance. The new Tower of Babel is no longer a physical construction that tries to touch the heavens, but an invisible network that connects brains, emotions, and desires. What used to be done with bricks is now done with programming language. Instead of a city that concentrates power, we have corporations with a planetary reach. And at the top of this structure are names that today define what is seen and what is ignored: technology companies, opinion leaders, digital influencers. This is not an apocalyptic speech. Technological advancement is real, beneficial, and necessary. But the question remains: what is at the heart of this movement? The search for authentic connection or the long-held desire for control? The use of language to communicate or to dominate? The loop appears to have returned to the point of origin. Humanity again tries to build something that brings together all people, all ideas, all cultures into one flow. But do we learn from the history of the tower? Or are we repeating the same script with new tools? The problem was never the union itself. The risk lies in the uniformity that eliminates dissent, in the centralization that masks freedom, in the ambition that disguises itself as progress. When everyone starts talking the same way, thinking the same way, and wanting the same things, the space for difference disappears. And when the different disappears, the essence of the human also disappears. Given this scenario, the ancient divine decision to confuse languages takes on a new meaning. It was not just an act of limitation, but a kind of preservation. By preventing humanity from following a path of total unification, God may have safeguarded something essential: the freedom to exist outside the dominant mold. The diversity of languages, cultures, and worldviews is not a problem to be fixed. It is a vital component of the human experience. The confusion at Babel was not the end of human development, but the beginning of complexity. From there, parallel stories emerged: autonomous trajectories, non-centralized discoveries, people who flourished with different visions of time, spirituality, and social organization. If everyone had followed the same model, perhaps creativity and the very notion of choice would have been stifled. Divine intervention in this case seems less punitive and more pedagogical, not to halt progress, but to reorient it. Interestingly, ancient traditions outside the biblical text also speak of a tower or a time when humans spoke the same language. A Sumerian poem titled Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata describes a time when all languages were one until the god Enki decided to confuse this harmony. The similarity with the biblical account suggests that the memory of this rupture was present in several ancient cultures, as if humanity, at some point, knew that excess unity carries a price. But if God is not afraid of advancement, why intervene? Perhaps because the tower was not a symbol of cooperation but of exclusion. A project that aims to unify everything under a single narrative inevitably leaves out those who don't fit. God does not destroy human ambition. He redirects. It diverts the route from totalitarianism to plurality, even if that means more noise, more chaos, more differences. Because freedom, to be real, needs to allow the risk of disagreeing. Even today, we live surrounded by new forms of Babel, projects that try to organize the world into a single system, a single moral language, a single format for success. The tower is still standing, but now within the invisible structures that define what is acceptable or not. Perhaps this is why the story of Babel remains so relevant. It's not just about the distant past. It's a mirror of the present. A reminder that not all progress is elevation, and not all unity is peace. The real problem was not the height of the tower, but the intention in the hearts of those who built it. When one builds to dominate, to perpetuate one's own name, to occupy the place of the divine, progress becomes idolatry. But when we build to serve, to collaborate, to expand human dignity, then there is no height that God will not allow us to reach. Babel fell without a stone being moved. It fell because the language that supported it lost its meaning. And perhaps the remaining question is, which tower are we building now? And what is it made of? Pride or purpose? If you enjoy investigations that combine history, the Bible, and critical thinking, this channel is the right place for you. Leave a like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. We are already preparing the next episode, and it will bring questions as challenging as this one.